Hello, friends, and welcome to Worldbuild with us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilferty, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Courtney Staples and Ian Woodworth. Ian, you might know from the podcast Under Common Taste. So, Ian, before we even get into our podcast, why don't you go ahead and introduce where people can listen to your podcast?
Hey, Rob. Thanks for having me back. Under Common Taste is available on basically all of your podcasting platforms. We are a homebrew TTRPG podcast, primarily Dungeons and Dragons. Our most recent series of episodes has been on various mythological monsters, how they were presented in myth and how they've been translated into TTRPGs. So we did a whole thing on sirens and harpies and creatures of that ilk.
Fun.
We did a whole thing on mermaids, merfolk, and all the various related monsters. We did the deep sea monsters, so the Leviathan and the Kraken and all those. The most recent one that I'm still editing at the time of recording, but will be out by the time this is released, is on monsters that petrify.
Oh,
Cool.
So the basilisk, the cockatrice, the gorgon, and the medusa.
very fun.
And we are getting ready to start into a whole bunch of episodes on North American cryptids.
Oh,
Ooh,
boy. There's
nice.
a panoply to work with there.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting. I'm looking forward to that. And where can people find you again? On every podcasting platform? Is that right?
Just about every podcasting platform. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Twitch, Mastodon at Under Common Taste.
Oh, Lord. You're on the Mastodon now?
We're there. I don't do a whole lot, but I'm there. We do still have a presence on the burning hulk of Twitter at UCT Homebrew.
Yeah. We're also still on there. And, I keep asking, like, how much longer?
Yeah.
But that's neither here nor there. Anyway, we got a show to do, folks. So before we get into our episode, which is a prompt from a listener, Orlando, we've got to plug our pluggables too. So first things first, if you want us to build your world, you go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, where you can click the link, follow the instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. We've also got a YouTube channel now where you can go over there, click the subscribe and the follow and the like and the comment and all that stuff that makes me nauseous. But guess what? You feed the algorithm gods by doing so. We're also, like I just alluded to, still somehow on Twitter at Let's Worldbuild. We've also got a Discord if you want to come and chat with us more directly. And of course, if you're feeling particularly generous or you just want access to those sweet, sweet patron-only episodes and other goodies, you can go to our Patreon and give us money there. Now, with all of that out the way, let's get into the prompt. This is coming from Orlando, who says, "The Earth was the same until it wasn't. Cryptids, fantasy beasts, fantasy races, and even dinosaurs have come from another Earth. Classic magic, which is capitalized, spells like fireball, is prominent. Blimps fly through the sky, carrying passengers to the different corners and regions of the Earth in this land of 1,000 differences. There are still steam and diesel technology, and also mechs and copper robots." So that's our initial prompt. Tenet number 1. Earth has the exact same countries and cities. Parentheses, New York is the capital of the world. Sure. Number 2, there are sects of ancient wizards, both good and evil. And number 3, there are orcs, goblins, dragonborn, dinosaur-born, elves, and dragons.
I
Yes,
think
on the
you're.
prompt, it says dwarfs, Courtney.
Yeah.
I know what it says.
I just
I'm
wanted to-
omitting that
Well, it's part
personally.
of the prompt, so.
Is it, though? I mean, if I don't read it, then it's not part of the prompt. So
I don't know. I'm looking at it right
anyway,
here.
we've got a guest host here with us. So Ian, why don't you start us off with your first tenet, sir?
All right. So when I was reading the prompt, the thing that I was trying to figure out initially is if they have the whole spectrum of D&D-esque magic, why are they still using steampunk slash dieselpunk thematic machinery?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So my first tenet is that magic is a purely destructive force. You cannot
Ooh.
create with magic, you can only destroy.
That's fun as hell, actually. I like that a
Interesting.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
So what can we kind of suss out from that idea? There's no creation magic. It is only a destructive thing, right? It's warfare only, effectively, right?
I mean, I can see industrial applications for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, things like using magic to blast rock in a quarry or
Mhm.
to, you know, burn fuel in a steam engine. But the act of using the magic can only destroy things.
Mm.
Okay.
That's really fascinating. I'm
Yeah.
like
I like that.
really interested to see how that works.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And
Yeah.
the lack of like healing magic would be interesting to
Oh
deal with, given
yeah.
that there's gonna be all this destruction all of a sudden.
Yeah, I like that a lot as well because it's like you're forced to rely on technology,
Mhm.
like to heal and to like do other like that. That to me is rather interesting because it's like honestly one of my pet peeves with traditional fantasy settings is like how common healing magic, especially
Mhm.
resurrection, is because it
Yeah,
feels oftentimes that like you take away some of the stakes by having so much healing magic thrown around. You know?
agreed. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a fun one. We can definitely work with that. And it is interesting because it kind of fits with one of my tenets. The
Same
first,
actually.
yeah, oh, let's go, let's do it then. So the first tenet that I wanted to introduce. So as you well know, right, longtime listeners will understand that I'm not the biggest fan of fantastical races, right? Just because to me it often doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I wanted to focus in on the fantastical races for this particular episode, and I wanted to say that near the end of World War One, there was a blood curse that happened to come from this other world. And as a result of this blood curse, humans do not exist. They have
Mm.
mutated into the orcs, goblins, etc. of this particular world now. So humans once existed, but they do not anymore. And so they've transformed into the myriad fantasy races as a result of this blood curse from the end of World War One.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yes. So again, I don't want it to just be like, hey, there's a portal and then popped out some dragonborn. Like that to me
Mhm.
is like less interesting. Let's force the humans to do it. Let's force the humans to grow 2 feet, big tusks, and green skin all of a sudden. Like that to me is a lot more interesting.
Mhm.
Also, I've done it again by cramming several tenets into one, but we'll get to that later, I suppose. Courtney, what did you say was slightly related to your destructive magic bit?
Yeah, I think pretty heavily related actually. Mine is that
Okay.
because of the suddenness and the severity of this event, whatever had happened, and I guess we'll have to work with yours to figure out what this event really looked like. But
Hmm.
basically, massive but also somewhat disorganized wars have taken place in an attempt to preserve the dominance of, at the time, the human species, but again,
Mm.
compromised there. And it's not like this is across the globe necessarily. I think it depends
Hmm.
on the cultures and species that are intermingling in any given region, but
Hmm.
there's definitely been a lot of loss and destruction. And one of Orlando's tenets was that Earth has the exact same countries and cities. And well, I
Correct.
think that could be true in terms of location. I also think that certain nations may have just been completely wiped out by
Mm.
like hordes of dinosaur born, or cities may have been burnt to ash by dragons. And
Mm.
this could also help explain why the technology is different and even why like blimps seem to be such a core mode of transit,
Hmm.
because maybe planes got wiped out during these conflicts along with like power grids and resources in general,
Mm.
especially aided by Ian's destructive magic. So yeah, my tenet is pretty much that a lot of war happened in the aftermath here.
I think that fits pretty well with the timeline that I'm looking at right now, or at least
Mhm.
the vague timeline, right? Because I too saw that, like, hey, the Earth's countries have to be maintained. So I thought like a good way to do that as best we can is to like jump the timeline and put it into I mean, I know it was over 100 years ago at this point, but like relatively recent time, right?
Yeah.
So like World War I is like, okay, the world has basically settled into what the world we know is right now. But I am really fascinated at this idea that there is a war of like, we need to keep our humanity, like that is an inevitably lost, right? Through the kind of like blood curse of this endless mutation. So I suppose, Courtney, considering that we have a conflict there, should we square this now?
Yeah, I'm curious how you think it might work. Like, if it's just a matter of now these new sort of species fighting for dominance in the world, which I'm fine going with that. Like, given that, if one group suddenly turns into orcs and another turns into goblins, like there probably would be some innate conflict there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what I'm mostly interested in here is this idea that like we want to preserve this idea that humanity was fought for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I think is really interesting about that is I deliberately didn't specify how the blood curse worked specifically so we can like have some wiggle room here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking that this mutation, it doesn't necessarily have to be a quick explosion of, like, oh, it's been day 5 and suddenly I'm an orc. It's like maybe this
Yeah.
is a generational thing. Maybe it's like
Yeah.
as we continue to breed generations, it's become more and more prevalent that these kind of fantasy races have become the new
Mm-hmm.
human, so to speak.
I like that. Which could also, of course, my mind immediately goes in these horrible directions of like infanticide. If your child
Oh,
comes out like
absolutely.
more orcish than you or whatever, and you want to preserve your humanity as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I mean, the idea of like blood purity was so common and
Right.
so prevalent around the time that we're talking about that. Like, and this is already incredibly dark, but like eugenics was absolutely
Yep.
a thing that was
Yep.
being toyed with around that time period. And then obviously it kind of um, culminates in World War II. But now
Yeah.
all of a sudden we've got this new wrinkle in the timeline where it's like, no matter what we do, we're going to transform into these, or our children will transform into these things.
Yeah.
And I think that making it this generational thing where the offspring are the ones who start displaying these abilities, that it doesn't necessarily mutate the people who are already alive and human. I think
Mm.
that that timeline works really well if we wanted to maintain a parallel timeline for culminating and really breaking out into large scale violence around
Mm.
1939,
Mm.
around
Mm.
World War II. And the scope of that would also work
Yeah.
in this particular scenario.
Yeah, I mean the timeline does tend to match up because think about it that way, like 1919 to night. So it's 20 years. So it's really like
Yep.
the first generation of these mutants of these like fantasy races is starting to come to prominence, right?
And they're starting to get old enough to have kids of their own.
Exactly. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
there's an
Mm-hmm.
inherent tension with the old world and the new world. Like, yeah, that absolutely works, doesn't it? Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of that.
So okay. This kind of fights with one of my other tenets here, but let's move on for now because this is already a very interesting kind of world that we're taking a look into right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's put a little pin in this for now. Well, for me, for my stuff, and we'll go back to Ian. Ian, what does your second tenet look like?
All right. So the prompt mentioned cryptids. And I I got the impression that the cryptids would not be formerly human because
Mm-mm.
you're I'm going to rules lawyer your tenant here, Rob, because you did say that it was the fantasy races
Correct. Yeah.
that
Uh-huh.
humanity turned
Yeah.
into.
Correct.
So my second tenet is that rural areas of the world now hold a disproportionately large amount of political power compared to what they did under human domination, because that's where the cryptids live.
Mm,
Interesting. That's really cool. I like
that
that a
is,
lot.
yeah. Yeah. So did the cryptids, like, are you imagining that they were ones that sort of teleported over, or did they come from another source?
I mean, the way that I was reading the prompt suggested that this is two parallel realities that sort of got
Yeah.
smushed
Yeah.
together.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's quite where this setting is moving towards with the way that we are presenting our
Mhm.
tenets, but I would rather it just be that the cryptids were here all along,
Uh,
and now that with the dissolution of humanity, the cryptids are coming out of the
Mm.
woods.
ooh, I like that.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
What makes the rural areas of power, right? Like, because you say it's the cryptids, but what do the cryptids bring to the political landscape that makes them inherently powerful?
Well, if you look at cryptids in most stories, they're cryptids because they have some sort of supernatural aspect to them, some sort of supernatural power to them.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it is just being something like a Sasquatch, where you're 9 feet tall and can just snap off a tree and beat someone to death with it,
Sure.
or again, in the case of a Sasquatch, you just disappear. You're able to
Mhm.
just not be where they thought that you were.
Disappear almost as though they never existed at all.
Absolutely.
Whoa.
And some of these are like shapeshifters, so they're able to change
Mm.
their appearance to fit into a different place in
Oh, are we
society.
getting
And
into Skinwalker territory now?
uh, I'm not, because
Okay. Okay.
there is a great taboo around using that term that I try to respect.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Hmm.
that is one of the Native American folk creatures that you don't talk about, because talking about them gives them power
Oh, okay.
and can attract them to you.
Okay. Okay, that's really cool then. So
Interesting.
interesting. Yeah, that I mean that in and of itself, I'm like, oh, that's like a boogeyman right there in this particular setting. So like that's quite something. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where I'm getting at, is that, I was under the impression that the setting was happening in sort of a modern day
Mm.
world.
Mhm.
So all of this conflict and stuff this is recent, but it's history. And the world has sort of moved on from that. They've figured out how to get along, more or less, in the way that we have as a global society more or less figured out how to get along.
Mm-hmm.
And so the cryptids would be players in the global political system. And
Mhm.
so, because the rural areas, the areas outside of the cities, are the areas where the cryptids live, because they don't have you don't have a Sasquatch city. They live out in the forests. And so, because of that, the cryptids, being supernatural creatures with supernatural abilities, would have disproportionately larger amounts of clout.
Hmm.
Mm. So these rural spaces suddenly become like diplomatic outposts for the cryptid nations, like the disunited cryptid nations of this particular world, effectively.
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
Mm. Okay.
I think it's more that there's suddenly a not demographic. What's the
Population?
constituents? There's a
Ah,
constituency that did not previously exist that has made itself known.
Mhm.
gotcha.
It's
Okay.
also the fact that you said that the cryptids sort of came out of hiding when all this magic came to be, or kind of woke up or something. So it's almost like they know what their powers are. They're emerging at full power versus the
Mm.
humans who are like
Yeah,
evolving
who are
over
trying to figure
generations.
out what in the world's going on.
Mm.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm. That's very interesting indeed.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can dig that though. Like, I like the idea that there's like these are basically the stewards of the old world, kind of in a way, you know?
Hmm.
Cool. Um, Courtney, what do you got for your second tenant?
So my second tenet is with this infusion of magic into the earth, things associated with magic and the occult now do actually have tangible magical power.
Yes.
So people who practiced magic in whatever form on earth can now actually channel their energy into legitimate spells. Relics that supposedly had some magical or divine power now actually do. And I don't know how this fits in with our exact timeline, but I was thinking even stuff like Ouija boards can now actually contact spirits, or Magic the Gathering cards can be used to cast spells and summon creatures.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be easy or obvious how to make all that happen, but it can happen.
I'm so glad that you brought this up, because I was trying to figure out how we were going to square like ancient sects of like wizards in this particular world. And I was like, maybe we can just have like Madame Blavatsky and like Aleister Crowley just be like actual magicians now.
Yeah.
And the fact
yeah,
that you
definitely.
codify it just makes it so much easier to deal with. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also love the fact that you're bringing in like power of relics and stuff like that too. Although what I find interesting is this kind of, what I see as a kind of friction between something like well, if there's only destructive magic, right, what do holy Christian relics do they even have power, or is it like only the destructive ones work or something like that, like I'm rather curious to see how we can square that type of thing as well.
I mean, have you read the Old Testament?
Oh yeah, no, I'm not
It's
saying
all
that.
fire and brimstone.
No. What I'm suggesting is like more modern like relics and stuff. They're supposed to be like, oh, you rub your foot on the bone and then you're healed, right? Like that's the healing magic that we kind of associate with it. But if all magic is destructive, then what purpose do those saints in like thigh bones and finger bones have now? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think they just wouldn't work, which would create a lot of interesting interactions between religions, I think.
That's what I'm saying.
Like, wait, we can cast fireballs, but this holy water still doesn't do anything? Shit.
Yeah. Exactly. Where it's just like, so the spear of Longinus is still like a destructive spear, right? But like the oh man, we don't heal anything anymore. So there is this kind of like, oh, there's a crisis of faith that's probably happening within the church.
Yeah.
And realistically, right, with this onset of magic, I can see how the Christian churches will see this kind of shift, how they can see magic as heretical because it doesn't work the way that they're thinking their magic should work, right?
Well, there will also be certain sects within that religion, some of the more extreme sects, who will see it as their vindication that they are correct, because now they are able to smite the evildoers in their eyes.
Like literally call down lightning from the heavens.
They're literally able to call down fire and brimstone from the heavens.
Yeah.
I'm totally down with stuff like that. Yes. And obviously there's always going to be like, this is the end times. Now is truly the end times. When we mutate, it means that our souls are actually being ascended into heaven, like, stuff like that. It's the reinterpretation as has always happened forever and ever. Right.
Yep.
That's cool. I'm cool. I like that a lot, Cordy. That's thank you for making that a tenet. That makes it much easier, honestly.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah, it does work out well with the like massive amounts of war that have been going on. If all of a sudden there's also these religious conflicts on top of everything.
Yeah. So about that, right? I have a little bit of a snafu when it comes to my second tenet, and I'm just going to read it out. So my second tenet tentatively is the age we're focusing on is heavily inspired by the Gilded Age of the 1920s. So we're thinking Art Deco and extreme wealth disparity. Think prohibition, but it's not alcohol that's been outlawed, but something else, right? And I'm thinking that if we went from, like World War I, but now we're on the cusp of a new generation, I'm just assuming here that the wars and the conflicts has stunted progression to the point where like it has been 20 plus years, but we're only now getting to this Gilded Age era, right?
So sort of like how in the Fallout video games, everything stagnated at early 1950s following World War II.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. So there's a bit of stagnation here, but what this also implies, right, is that the Gilded Age is the age of stuff where it's actually pretty good right before World War II is about to happen. So it's the time where America, it's pre Black Friday, Black Thursday. It's like before the stock market crashes. It's when Americans are extremely wealthy. They're like flaunting their wealth to Europeans because the Europeans are so shocked by the end of World War I that they're paying dividends, but like incredibly poor, all that stuff. And the reason I wanted to kind of focus on this as well is because metaphorically, in the 1920s, New York was the capital of the world, culturally, technologically, all that stuff. And so if the tenant tells me that New York has to be the capital of the world anyway, I'm like, oh, we can just relive that Art Deco thing here and do it that way, but have it be a little bit more literal, because it's like, yeah, the Americans are the most powerful. They're the Gilded Age era Americans where they're able to spend and all that stuff. So yeah, that's the kind of vibe that I got. And also, what's prohibited? It's not alcohol, it's something else. What is it?
Magical relics.
See, that's the easy thing, though, Ian. That's the easy way out. Yes, magic being outlawed is the easy prohibition era thing, but is that something that everyone's going to want? You know, like prohibition was so popular because it's like everyone was drinking, right? And people were like, actually, we kind of agree with these gangsters and robbers because we don't agree with prohibition. So, but if like everyone wants a gun in the form of like a magical spell, that doesn't necessarily make as much sense to me. So, but I'm curious to see how we can square that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Let's see.
So unlicensed magic isn't something that you want to go with?
Oh, we can do licensed and unlicensed magic. That's not a problem at all. But I'm saying that the commodity that is prohibited is not alcohol in it, and I prefer it not to be magic or relics.
Okay.
So we haven't gotten to the mech suits and the copper robots part of the prompt yet.
Yeah.
We've barely touched on technology at all. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
So what if it was something along those lines? What if it was like a robot servant class or something like that? Yeah. Or maybe some sort of rudimentary artificial intelligence. What the thing that is powering these copper robots?
Okay. I really like that, because now we can get into a situation where everyone wants a copper robot, everyone wants a friend, and now that they have started to develop AI, it's like, okay, we've got to ban them, because we can't have them gain sentience on our watch, like that kind of thing. But now we have like a parallel underground railroad where it's just like, hey, this one's starting to develop intelligence. We've got to hide it. Like there could be like a parallel between like it's a younger thing because the fantasy races are like, why are you trying to exterminate them? Like you're trying to exterminate us, like that kind of thing. But I'm tossing this, I'm rapid firing here. So like I'm open to other interpretations here as well.
Now, we are also just now coming out of World War I, or our World War I equivalent.
Right.
What's to say that the copper robots are not wholly robot, but are like grafted bionic appendages for, war veterans who lost body parts in the war. And so they are going through their own loss of humanity in real time because they are also being seen as lesser to some extent because they are not wholly human anymore.
I mean, it's also a great parallel to shell shock, which we would later know as PTSD. Plus, what it can also be like kind of emblematic of is the power that these human purists actually have throughout the culture, where we're at a point where purity culture isn't just about humanity. It's about, well, you have robot parts, like you're no longer part human. And you have this really interesting, like, conflict that might arise where it's just like you have veterans who have like brass and copper robot parts, and you have veterans who don't. And they're like, I'd rather die than like not be human anymore. And it's like they're trying to like show that humanity doesn't rely on like prosthesis or doesn't rely on like, being an orc or an elf or something like that. That's so remarkably interesting to me that I'm super down with that.
And then you would also have the potential for another aspect where we can pull in some inspiration from like cyberpunk, where you have certain wealthy individuals who are actively augmenting themselves, actively removing parts of themselves and replacing them with these metallic biotic parts as an effort to extend their lives.
And they could be doing it secretly so that they can still pretend to be all about the purity of humanity, when in fact their torso is entirely robotic at this point.
I will see your robot parts and I will raise you the other parts of fantastical races as well. What, what does a blood transfusion do if it's a mutant? Or what happens if you try and graft elf parts onto a human body? Or like the scales or the muscular arm of an orc onto a human body, like there's going to be fuckery. There's going to be people who see these fantasy races not as mutants, but as like the next evolution, right? Like there's going to be a conflict between those who see humans as the pure genetic race. And then there's going to be like, well, wait a minute. These people are stronger. These people are faster or can see in the dark, whatever. Their genetics are pure. So you have like two eugenicist viewpoints that like inherently clash with one another.
Exactly. That's exactly the point that I was about to make, is because eugenics is not always about culling the undesirable portions. It's also about cultivating the desirable portions.
Yes.
And so you would end up having pseudoscientists on either end of that spectrum doing heinous things in the name of advancing science.
Oh boy.
Yeah. I mean, just thinking about the human experimentation that happened during World War II, which is horrendous as it is. And then throwing in this idea of magic and robotics and other species, other races. Like,
I hear you. We're not there yet, Courtney. We're not at the World War II phase yet. We're right before that. We can see it. We're standing on a hill and we're looking at it, but we're not there yet.
But that said, like if war is on the horizon, people are probably going to be starting to experiment with like super soldier type things. Like if they can sense this threat that's looming, they might be trying to get ahead of the game.
I think that they're a little worried about the economic depression that's going on,
I guess it would depend on, I mean, obviously not everybody's going to be worried about that. But when we're talking about like the extremely wealthy people who are trying to maintain power.
Well, hold on, because again, if we're following like historically accurate stuff, and we're not obviously, but like if we're following the rhythms of history, then all of those rich eugenicists are about to lose all of their fucking money when the stock market crashes. And like that to me is kind of a fun thing that we can explore as well. Like what happens in this age of like, okay. I'm thinking about a million things all at once here. Everyone's gotten their tenets out, correct?
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's do a recap and then we'll do the twist and then we'll reconcile that twist to figure out where we can kind of go from here. Maybe the twist will be like, nah, Courtney's right. Let's start talking about super soldiers and stuff like that. We'll figure that out a little bit later. So, Ian, you started us off today. Remind us, what is your first tenet?
My first tenet is that magic cannot create, it can only destroy.
Do you feel like that has been honored, and do you feel like we've done that justice thus far?
I think that we addressed it. I think that it has established its place in our setting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Courtney, what was your first tenet?
That because of all this magic happening, that just led to a ton of war kind of across the globe, depending on what cultures and species were now interacting. And basically a lot of stuff got destroyed and slaughtered and lost in this period.
We've kind of had to like work around that. Do you feel like that has worked out well for you, like in terms of the timeline? What are you thinking about? How are you feeling about this?
I mean, I guess I've been picturing it as a very war-torn world, like even more so than the world was after World War One. But
Gotcha. So it's even in more dire circumstances now.
Right. And like I was saying, that could kind of explain why they veered into this direction technology-wise too. If tech had been destroyed or lost during this period of conflict, and they're sort of recovering from that and using magic to help with that.
Gotcha. Sure. Yeah. All right. My first tenet, all of these fantasy races are a result of a massive blood curse that happened around the end of World War One and has caused them all to transform into them. Now, after chatting with Courtney and kind of making it work, we've decided that it is generational. So humans will stop existing after a certain amount of time. But as of right now, we're in the transitional period, right?
Yes.
Okay. Fabulous. And I feel happy with that. I feel like that's kind of a big conflict point that's happening in the world right now. So, Ian, remind us, what was your second tenet?
My second tenet was that rural areas have disproportionately more political clout because that's where the cryptids are.
So, as you've talked about this, I cannot help but feel like there is a Sasquatch Eugene Debs out there somewhere. I don't know why, but in my brain, I'm like, that's definitely what's going on. These Sasquatches or these cryptids are like, listen here, we need to establish some kind of a socialist utopia. And I'm like, hell yeah, Eugene Debs, you tell him, Sasquatch. Like, I don't know why, but like in my brain, I'm like, that's what's going on. And they're starting to like gather a lot more people and stuff like that to their cause.
The mental image that I had whenever I first came up with this tenet was that Mothman is the leader of the free world.
Okay. I mean, he is going to be able to warn us about stuff that's going to happen. So I suppose that's not too far off.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Okay. Interesting. I feel like we should probably suss this out a little bit more. What do you think?
I mean, I'd be all for going a little deeper on this one.
Yeah. Courtney, what do you think? How can we expand upon this idea?
I think kind of going more into how they've developed their own societies and how they may have intermingled with, well, what was once humanity and what's now evolving into different things. I'd be curious about that. Like, are they, actively sending like ambassadors over to New York City as the capital, or are they very cut off, or are they just kind of...
Yeah, are they insular, or are they like very open and like trying to like seek acceptance from the greater worlds?
I almost see them as sort of like these grassroots organizations that are making sure that the world continues to function while all the higher ups are concerned with their race wars.
Gotcha. Okay.
So they're like making these communes where the refugees of the various interspecies conflicts can go and be safe.
Okay. So after World War One, and then after the war-torn period that happened afterwards, the natural world itself is probably in pretty rough shape, right? With all the war-tornedness that Courtney was kind of alluding to.
Yeah.
Are these rural cryptid folks, are they more interested in like healing the natural world, and that's like part of their oeuvre as well? Because that's where my brain goes.
See, I'm not so certain about nature being terribly affected, because most of the fighting would be concentrated in urban areas where the people are.
I mean, kind of, right? Because like you do have like the scouring of the landscape, and like people finding bullets that have been in fields and stuff like that. Like if you've seen All Quiet on the Western Front, like the landscapes there are blasted and gray and mud. Like that's
right.
kind of where my brain, like, because if we have widespread war, not just urban warfare, right, then I can also imagine this being a problem.
But the thing about the Western Front is it was basically a stretch of land between two larger urban areas. that they were fighting over for position to the point where it basically became a stalemate because neither side's offensive capabilities could overcome the other side's defensive capabilities.
Mhm.
And so they got stuck there. But if you went, 50 miles away from the Western Front, if you went away from no man's land, aside from, the population being greatly diminished
Yeah.
and you have certain lack of resources, the natural world was largely unaffected.
Okay. So maybe we can kind of tie that into their kind of political positioning. Like maybe they're kind of like a neutral zone or something like that, or like a place like a refuge for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's what I'm thinking.
Okay. Yeah, I can deal with that. That's cool.
They're like, we don't care where you're from, we don't care what you've done, but once you're here, you're going to follow the rules or there will be consequences.
Mm. What are the rules that we have to follow here, Ian?
Oh, basically just, be nice to each other. it's like there is no fighting under this roof.
Be nice to each other or we'll snap your leg like a twig. Like that is the ultimate fascistic threat. Yes.
It's like that scene with Hulk and Loki, puny god.
Yeah, exactly. But that would murder a regular person horribly. Okay.
Probably.
Yeah, almost certainly, yes. Okay, all right. Courtney, what was your second tenet? What do you got for us?
That was that with magic being infused into the earth, anything associated with magic or occult stuff is now actually legitimately magical. So people who practiced magic now do have legit magical power. Relics have been imbued with magical or divine power. And even things like Ouija boards or playing cards could potentially play a role here.
Right. Tarot cards, obviously.
Oh, yeah,
right?
definitely. Yep.
Yeah, like I love the idea of like the occult being something that is like real again, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing that we've talked about and that I do love is the idea that yes, you can bring all the all-stars of the age, who were alive around that time and be like, nah, they're alive. They're there, like the Golden Lodge, they're there. They're, like stuff like that. That's all really interesting to me. There is a great Cthulhu supplement by I think it's Robin D. Laws, where it's like Paris in the 1800s or something like that, and it's this exhaustive, detailed like lodge of like so many occult dealings and goings on and stuff like that, and I just love the idea of it. Anyway, a little bit off topic here, but yes, I love the implications of this particular tenet, Courtney.
Yeah, I feel like we definitely fleshed that out pretty well, and we can continue to bring it into the twist and whatever happens there.
Yeah, we got to get to that twist. Yeah. But before we do, I've got my second one. So the age we're focusing on is heavily inspired by the Gilded Age of the 1920s. We're thinking Art Deco, extreme wealth disparity. We're thinking Prohibition. And we've decided that Prohibition is actually on like human or non-human or what is perceived as non-human parts, things, etc. I'm happy with the work that we've kind of done there as well. Yeah, cool. So let's roll this twist, shall we?
All right.
Let's do it.
And our twist this time is the stakes get even bigger. Well, I think that kind of wins the argument for Courtney here that we're gonna roll right into World War II era shenanigans sooner rather than I would have liked to, but whatever, it's fine. Yeah, no, that works for me. Unless Ian has a better idea here, what can we do to make the stakes even bigger?
I mean, I think that the accelerated timeline will work, especially whenever destructive magic is thrown into the mix, and especially if it is an innate magical ability rather than a taught or learned magical ability, which we may not want to do. But if that is the case, then we have a situation that is more accepting for a French Revolution style scenario on a global scale.
Ooh.
Where the disenfranchised now have the means to overthrow the elites.
I like it. Yeah.
I think I have a way to square that as well. So, I mean, because we have fantastical races, let's make them fantastical, right? So I think it might be interesting if, let's say elves, for example, had a greater magical aptitude than humans would. And it's just a matter of like, well, I'm an elf. Like I just happen to have greater affinity for magical things. And you can do that with myriad fantastical races as well. And I think that works because now you do have like, well, look, we've got technology, we've got an open mind, and we've got the magic. So maybe what we're seeing instead is not, the stock market crash, but the abolishment of capitalism and the stock market entirely,
I definitely obviously like that direction, but
really? Wow. Courtney, that's surprising.
I do also think the my idea that I brought up earlier could still fit in where like the wealthy class is trying desperately anything to maintain their power. And that's where the experimentation and fucked up robotics and eugenics come in, where they see that this that they could potentially be toppled and they just decide to do anything to keep that from happening.
Ian, how do you feel about your Mothman / Sasquatch, like the rural areas being a kind of paragon for an alternative to capital? Like, because that's how I see this kind of conflict happening, where it's like, and mind you, they might not even be warlike, they might not even be like militant about it, but it's just like, well, we have an example of what could happen. Why don't we expand that out to the regular world?
Yeah, I can see that working, especially since, we have these cryptids who ostensibly don't have a capitalistic structure to whatever society they would have, because if you have capital, then you leave evidence.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. That totally makes sense. All right. So my idea of Sasquatch Eugene Debs still makes sense. I'm still in there. I'm still happy about it. Okay. Cool. So that was surprisingly easy. So I suppose my question now is, where do we set this narrative? Is it on the cusp? Because to me, what I find interesting about this setting is not the fact that we're in wartime, but rather we're in the middle where, like you see the conflicts that are like, again, we're right on the verge of that happening. And to me, the tension, like the conflict that's happening, like that to me is a lot more delicious than the war itself. Because war, while incredibly important, while incredibly like it makes stuff happen, it's kind of boring to me if I'm thinking about this from a role-playing game perspective, because like, yeah, you can play like a Navy SEAL type team or a Marines or something like that. But I'm always more interested in like the far more human stories that happen.
One thing that we haven't touched on at all that does actually appear fairly prominently in the prompt is blimps as a form of transit. So I'm wondering if we can do something around that in some way.
All right, so make blimps a part of what we're focusing on in the narrative.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Interesting. How do we make that happen then?
I don't know exactly. Like if, I guess we could have like a dual narrative going where we're following these communist or socialist rebels on the ground that are working with these cryptids versus the very wealthy individuals, maybe who are now in blimps because that's like the safe place to be is off the ground.
Thank you. I'm like, poor people don't have access to blimps, Courtney.
Right,
That's always been a rich person thing, 100%. So yeah, I'm glad that we're there. We have like flying sky fortresses effectively, right?
Yeah.
And then what's interesting about that as well is that the blimps themselves are effectively a stage for that wealth disparity, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Good call. Excellent job, Courtney.
Mhm.
Yeah. So what's going on? Are we leading a raid onto a blimp, or is it like maybe we're infiltrating a blimp to get some evidence or get some kind of like dirt or money? Is this a heist? Like, what's the situation that we're dealing with here?
Well, the thing about a blimp is that you can't grow food on a blimp, and the fuel eventually runs out and has to be replenished. So that blimp has to land eventually.
Yeah.
So the whole thing may be trying to figure out when and where a blimp is going to land. And then doing some sort of maybe it is you're someone who's on the blimp and you have to make that supply run in secret and get off the ground without getting noticed. Maybe it is you are someone on the ground who needs to get in and rescue someone from the blimp, or someone who wants to go in and sabotage the blimp, or something along those lines. But I think that centering this around a blimp having to land would work.
Yeah, that's a fantastic idea, Ian. I really like that. I mean, we could even take it away from the blimp, and it's just like the entire storyline, the entire quest is about the coordinates or the map and the itinerary of when this thing is going to land and where, right? Like that information is so important enough and alone that like you could have an entire quest line about it, right? Like,
yeah,
it's that to me, like intelligence being the thing that we're after is really smart. And I love that idea a lot, Ian. That's so cool.
Maybe they're trying to locate that one last secret hidden blimp depot, that one last airfield that where they are systematically going and restocking, that the rest of the world hasn't figured out where that is yet.
I wonder if this is like this universe's version of the Hindenburg.
Oh my God, yeah. This is the Hindenburg.
Like it fits with the timeline too.
Disaster, yeah. Okay. Oh, you know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of when the Untouchables grab Al Capone's accountant, right? Where it's just like, we're not going to get him on the big stuff, but if we have the accountant who can kind of uncover how the economics and the fraud and all of that work, like that to me is effectively what we're doing here. We're not going out and we're not like mowing down rich people in this setting, but it's like if we have the maps of where these depots are, of where even like the small stop off points are, that is like massive. It's like uncovering like the coded language that allowed us to spy on Japan, like for, you know, a very long time, to the point where it's like a massive intelligence problem for the Japanese in World War II, you know, like that kind of thing. Like that's the key that you have in your hand. So you could really, like, if you want to do a straight MacGuffin, you're like, here's the book that has the codes, that has the map, right? Or it's like, this is the book that has the map in it. Like that alone is such a huge thing for the enemy to have. Like, bam, there you go.
It's almost like the Enigma device.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, is figuring out the device that maybe what we're looking for is the reason that they haven't been able to find it is because it is mobile. And so they can pick it up and move it to a new location. And all of these airships have this one device that is synced and runs through a certain series of coordinates periodically that will update it to where this mobile depot is supposed to be at any given time.
Can I throw in some treachery and betrayal here for you, Ian?
I love me some treachery and betrayal.
Here's what I'm thinking. It is the rural area. There is one particular rural area where they're allowing this blimp to land, right? That they're like selling out the other folks because they're so strictly adhering to like it being a neutral zone, that there is like, oh, like, yes, you guys are bastards, but oh, come on, we got, you know, like there's this conflict that happens. And then there's obviously just one person, or there's one cryptid rather, who's like, fuck it, I'm a prophet. I'm not really about this whole socialist lifestyle. Like, I'm a skunk ape. Give me that money. Like whatever. Like something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could work.
Mm-hmm.
I see no reason why it couldn't.
Because to me, right, it's like they seem like they're so at odds that of course no one would really suspect like a rural, like cryptid zone for a landing or a depot point,
Yeah, I think it totally works and definitely ties in with the tropes of like betrayal and double crossing in like wartime stories and sort of spy stories. So I like it.
And it could be a thing where they know that there is a rat, that there is a collaborator, and they have to figure out who it is.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. This could be like a hidden role RPG, basically, where you hand out everybody's secret roles at the start, and there's one saboteur.
I love those, Courtney. I've done a couple of those before.
Mm-hmm.
Those are. If you haven't done that, by the way, this is complete aside. If you haven't done secret roles as a one-shot RPG, you are missing out. Because, man, I have never seen such gleeful knife in the back nonsense than I have in, like, you all have your own ambitions. You all have your own missions. Like, you got to do it. And then people are like, yeah, I'm going to just, like, stab my best friend. I don't give a fuck. Like, that's the type of joy and phenomenal role-playing that you can get out of stuff like that. So, yeah.
That's also a very similar vein to the, at least the older editions of Paranoia.
Oh, yeah, I've never played Paranoia.
Me neither,
I haven't read Paranoia, actually.
Paranoia is a ton of fun.
I've heard very good things. I think Justin Alexander has talked about it quite a bit too, but that's neither here nor there. So, okay, I feel like now that we're rambling, we're very satisfied. I feel like we're satisfied with the main storyline quest, and I feel like it's time to wrap it up. How do y'all feel about that?
Yeah, I feel pretty good about what we accomplished.
Me too. I'm very happy about this. It's very fun.
Yeah, it's very solid, and we've got everything here. We've got factions, we've got plot lines. It all ties together well.
Oh yeah, very satisfying, very exciting. So a big thank you to Orlando for submitting this prompt. And before we get into our spiel, Ian, remind the people where they can find you and your podcast and media empire in general.
Oh yes, such a mighty empire it is. Our podcast is Undercommon Taste. You can find us on most every podcast aggregator. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Twitch, Mastodon at Undercommon Taste. We are on Patreon, patreon.com/Undercommon Taste. We have a Discord. I will give a link to our Discord if you want to come over and chat with us.
Oh yeah, I'm over there occasionally.
I'm not as active on the Discord as I'd like to be, but that's because nobody talks to me either. So come over and talk to me and I'll talk back.
Yeah, I hear you on that one. Yeah. Well, all right. So again, a big thank you to Orlando. And remember, if you want us to build your world like we did with Orlando's here today, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, where you can click the link, follow the instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. We've got a brand new YouTube channel that I just keep forgetting to talk about. Go over there, do all the YouTube stuff to it, say hi. In the comments, tell us your favorite Eugene Debs quotes. And if you don't know who he is, Google him. Wikipedia that shit. He's a cool guy. Interesting guy. Anyway, moving on. We got Twitter still at Let's Worldbuild. Come chat with us over there. But realistically, if you want to chat with us more directly, like Ian suggested, come over to our Discord with the link for that in the description. And if you're feeling particularly generous, you can always go to our Patreon, where you can get access to sweet, sweet patron-only goodies and double-length episodes as one of the big selling points for a lot of people. So, Orlando, if you want your next prompt to be twice as long, you want twice as much attention, that's how you do it. You go over to our Patreon with a link for that in the description and on our website. And with all of that out of the way, that's going to do it for this episode of World Build with Us. Remember that we love you very much, and we're going to get through this together. Until next week.